we have 15 games to look at in terms of this simulated MLS match week number 8. And the reason why there is 15 games I have to review is because you have to factor the 4 midweek games that is going to happen, and also the 11 game full slate action that happened in the weekend action of MLS match week number 8. So because of that, there are going to be a couple of teams that's going to be redundant in this review, and I'm going to mention them twice during this review. And I'm probably going to have to switch the board at least twice, because after I switch the board here to look at the last 7 games, I'm going to have to switch the board again to do the standings as we are in week number 8 of the simulated match, because I can't fit the standings after I switch the board and look at the last 7 game of this MLS simulated match week number 8. So without further ado, let us begin in terms of talk about these games. And this week, boy oh boy, we definitely had some upsets this week, and we had some big team that coming into this week when they were facing again a relatively weak team and in the lower part of the table, they thought it was going to be easy 3 points. Turns out not only it wasn't an easy 3 points, but after 90 minutes they walked out with just 0 points out of that game. But before we talk about the upset, let's us get into the first game, which is between DC and TFC, which both of these teams is in the middle part of the Eastern Conference, and both of these teams earn a honors even 2-2 draw out of this game. But we did see our first red card in the simulated match, and you know how last week I talked about how it was kind of a little bit suspicious, the fact that it has took us almost 6 match week in terms of the simulated action that we actually saw a penalty that happened. Well, I think it's even more suspicious, the fact that we have only saw our first sending off here, and this sending off was basically Frederick Briand decided to do a scissor tackle, and when you decided to do a scissor tackle on an opponent, yeah, that is an automatic red card. But what's very interesting is that I've seen some scissors challenge, and I've seen some very bad kind of challenge, and even some denial of goal score opportunity in the last couple of match week, and yet they were not deemed as a red card offense. So yeah, something is going on with MLS Pro, although at the same time we know that something always is going on with MLS Pro and the referees in this game, and that something tells me that they are not being truly honest. But going back to this, as I said, we saw our first red card with Frederick Briand getting sent off in the 18th minute. TFC quickly capitalized from being a man up as Alejandro Pozuelo is able to give them a 1-0 lead. But then DC would equalize just 7 minutes later from Ola Kamara. Then they would take the lead right on the stroke of halftime from Edison Flores. And this is definitely, this will even though both of these teams were in the middle part of the table, if DC would have won this, I would have classified this as a bit of an upset and kind of a surprising result, because you usually don't see a team that went down a man so early in the game, and yet they're able to win it throughout the entire time that they are down a man. But TFC eventually did get the equalizer. It came in the 61st minute when Alejandro Pozuelo, who has just been red hot lately, got another brace in this game, was able to get the equalizer for Toronto, and in the end it ends in an honors even 2-2 draw between DC and Toronto. And you know, I guess for DC, they'll be happy the fact that they were able to salvage a draw out of this game, considering they spent pretty much 72 minutes of this game without full strength. But at the same time, they did drop points at home. And as for TFC, again, they'll be happy the fact that they got a point on the road, but they'll be kicking themselves the fact that they had that many minutes of being a man up, and they cannot get all 3 points out of this match. But moving on, in terms of the next game, is the Union and the Galaxy. So the Union with a 2-1 win over the Galaxy to continue to show why they are the best team in the Eastern Conference. And Kasper Schmeichel also show why he is one of the most lethal striker in the league, because he grabbed a brace in this game. He scored first in the 21st minute to give the Union a 1-0 lead. Legit did tie the game up for the Galaxy, but the Union would eventually retake the lead when, again, the red-hot Schmeichel scores the goal and eventually scored the winner of the the game for the Union. And yeah, that is the final score of this game, as again, the Union continue to show why they are the class of the Eastern Conference. And that, I think, after when I finish doing the review of all 15 games, I think I'll show you where they are in the table. And here's a hint, they're at the top of the Eastern Conference. But moving on, in terms of the next match, so for one team that is at the top of each of their respective conference to another team that's also at the top of their respective conference, and that of course is Minnesota, who is right now the Supporters Shield leading team, and they continue to make the case why they are the Supporters Shield leading team by winning 1-0 against the Dynamo. Molino with the only goal in the 69th minute. The only thing that I'm a little bit concerned about the Loons with the way that they have gone their business in the last couple of games is that they haven't really scored a lot of goals. I mean, they've been getting a lot of these 1-0 result, and I think when they're playing another game during the weekend action, I believe they also got a 1-0 result. So it's great the fact that they're getting 3 points and they're getting consecutive shutout, and that this team, I think it's been a long time since this Loons defense have conceded a goal. But at the same time, it's also a long time since this Loons team have been able to score more than the one goal that they have scored. I mean, they started the season red hot in terms of their attack, but it started to kind of fizzle out a little bit. And the only concern I do have with them is that this is something kind of similar to last season where, you know, the defense really kind of stepped up and kind of carried them over the line to the playoffs. But you can't just always rely on that to be the case, and that, you know, hopefully their attack will be a little bit better. But at the same time, who am I kidding? They're at the top of their conference. I don't think there is a lot of issue in terms of the attack if they can continue to get all 3 points every single game. But moving on, in terms of the next match, so now we go to the bottom of the table and talk about the Quakes, who they did a classic Quakes road game in this game against the Rapids. At least that is from last season. This is basically what they've been doing on the road throughout last season, which is they give us some hope that we might get a point or all 3 points out of the game after the first half, and then they broke our heart in the second half and conceded late in this game. Andre Shinyashiki got the first goal of the game for the Rapids to give them a 1-0 lead. But then Vako, just like last year on the road, was able to score the equalizer. This time, however, came right on the stroke of halftime. And just like that, the game was tied up at 1 apiece, and it would continue to tie it up at 1 apiece. And you're thinking, looks like this game is going to end honors even, and the Quakes are probably going to get a well-deserved point. No. That's when Nicholas Benezet decided to kind of end the Quakes' dreams of getting a point out of Colorado, and he scored in the 78th minute to give the Rapids a 2-1 win. So, yeah, the Rapids, although it wasn't an impressive performance at home, they get the job done and get all 3 points. And for the Quakes, the miserable 2019 season continues, and I'll just say that, well, I meant the miserable 2020 season continue, and I'll just say that something's got to change with this team, whether if the GM is going to eventually have to go, and that Fornelli, clearly there's been a lot of Fornelli out kind of chant going on in the Quakes fan base, and I won't be surprised. Those chant is going to get louder, and the pressure is going to get heavier on him if this Quakes team continue to perform like this, because this is absolutely unacceptable from the Quakes with the way that this team was on the doorstep of making the playoffs last season to now being a team that looked like they were back in 2018 season form, which is a team that only won 4 games that season. But yeah, moving on in terms of the next match is the craziest game of this weekend action. So, you know how yesterday I made a video talking about the Redbulls and the Galaxy, and I kind of recapped that classic match of not only was David Beckham's first ever MLS game, but it was also one of the craziest 9-goal thriller you will ever see. Well, I think the Redbulls probably watched that video and think, you know what, let us kind of do a replica of that and try to do that in this game against the Revs, because although we didn't see a 9-goal thriller like we saw in that game in 2007, we saw an 8-goal thriller in this game, and it was kind of an insane game that I feel like coming out of this game, the refs are probably going to be very disappointed the fact that they didn't get anything out of this. Well, they only got a point out of this game. So the madness all started in the 10th minute when Christian Pineda scores to give the refs a 1-0 lead, but that lead would be short-lived in the 20th minute because Brian White would tie the game up. The refs did get the lead back 7 minutes later from Gustavo Bo, and then they made it 3-1 in the 37th minute from Theo Bunbury to take a 3-1 lead against the Redbulls. In the second half, that's when the momentum started to change a little bit because the Redbulls started to dominate, and they got one back in the 50th minute when Kaku was able to score to make it 3-2 in favor of the refs. Then the Redbulls tied it up in the 77th minute from Florian Vallet, and all of a sudden, it was 3-3 in this game, and the last 13 minute was something similar to what we saw in that 2007 matchup between the Galaxy and the Redbulls, where it was just back and forth and back and forth. And during this 13 minute, I was surprised that there was only 2 goals that was scored, because there could have been easily 4 or 5 goals that was scored in the last 13 minutes of this game. In the 84th minute, Carlos Gil would give the Revs a 4-3 lead and give them a lead that it looked like for sure that they were going to held on, and that, you know, even though it was a back and forth kind of affair, you thought that the refs were probably going to walk out with 3 points, and especially how they play in this game, which, you know, they play well in the first half, kind of sleep through a little bit in the beginning of part of the second half, but it looked like they were going to get the 3 points, and it looked like for most part of this game they were the better team. But no, that's not what happened, because in the 90th minute, Mark Szakowski scores the equalizer right as we head to stoppage time, and that is how this game ends, as it ends in a 4-4 crazy 8-goal thriller draw. And as I mentioned before, the refs, I think they're going to be very disappointed with this draw, considering they had the lead 3 times in this game, and 3 times they weren't able to hold it on. And what's even more heartbreaking is that they gave up a goal in the 90th minute. Like, anytime when you give up a goal that late in a game, it is going to be very heartbreaking, even if you're a team that is on the road. But as for the Redbulls, yeah, they kind of stole a point out of this game. And I know I said earlier that they looked pretty good in the start of the second half. Yeah, that was only for like 15 minutes before things kind of calmed down a little bit. Then things just pretty much gone crazy in the last 13 minutes, and it was basically a free-for-all for both of these teams in terms of trying to get the goal to win this game. But moving on, in terms of the next match, is from one game that was probably the craziest game of this weekend to one that was probably the most forgettable game of this weekend. Yeah, both of these teams are near the bottom of their respective conference, with Montreal, I believe, after this game, they're bottom of the Eastern Conference, while the Dynamo near the bottom of the Western Conference. And they show in this game why they're there. I mean, there wasn't really a lot of action that happened. There was 2 goals that was scored, first by Joel Waterman, who I believe that's his first ever goal, but Dynamo did tie it up just 9 minutes later from Tommy McNamara. But after that, yeah, it was hard to watch in terms of how both of these teams are just kind of trying to seal it out, and look like they weren't really thinking about going all 3 points. I mean, the Dynamo, they were at least trying to maybe get all 3 points, but Montreal also decided that they were just going to park the bus. And although it hasn't worked in the last couple of games, knowing the fact that they conceded 4 goals in the last 2 games, it did work this time because they were playing a Dynamo attack that pretty much was toothless in this game. So yeah, not much I can add about this game other than the fact that I guess both teams will be happy with a point, but it doesn't really help them whatsoever, and that they're going to still be stuck in either mediocrity or being the worst team in their respective conference. But yeah, moving on to the next match is TFC again. So Toronto, after they got a 2-2 draw against DC United, they unfortunately lost this one against the Galaxy as they lost 2-1 against them. Both of the Galaxy goal came from Jonathan Dos Santos, an unlikely source. First came in the 31st minute, and then the second came in the 65th. Jacob Schaffelberg did get one goal back for Toronto, as we head to stoppage time, to maybe give a slight hope that TFC can pull off something miraculous in stoppage time, but it wasn't meant to be, as the Galaxy, they were able to bounce back after that tough loss that they suffer against the Union and able to get all 3 points against a TFC team that hasn't really looked that impressive in the last couple of weeks. But just like last year, when you think that they haven't looked very impressive, somehow this team is still in the middle pack of the table, and somehow this team is still above the red line. But yeah, moving on, in terms of the next match, is probably the most surprising result of this week, and is the reason why I am wearing FC Cincinnati again, because FC Cincinnati just loved to create upsets and just love to beat teams that nobody give them a chance. So you know how a couple of weeks ago nobody gave them a chance when they were playing against Atlanta, and that they were going to suffer another loss, and yet they were able to get 3 points. Well, coming into this game against Orlando City, you would be crazy to bet against Orlando City to not able to get a win out of this game. And early on, it looked like it was going to be the case, because Mauricio Pereira scores to give Orlando City a 1-0 lead, and at that point, it really wasn't if Orlando City was going to win this game, but how many goals were Orlando City gonna put against this FC Cincinnati team that weren't doing very well this season? But it turns out the opposite happened, and it turns out that both teams just kind of switched role in this game, and FC Cincinnati really started to dominate Orlando City. They would get the equalizer just 11 minutes later from Frankie Amaya, who I believe that's his first ever goal in MLS history. And it's hard to believe the fact that he has not got a Gold Cup coming into this season, consider he played a full season with FC Cincinnati. But he got his first goal in his career in this game to tie the game up at 1 apiece. Then former Union midfielder Harris Mudunian would give FC Cincinnati the lead in the 65th minute. And then Maddox would kind of rediscover his form with Portland and score 2 goals late in this game. First came in the 74th minute to pretty much shut the door on Orlando City, and then in the 89th minute to add the cherry on the top to give FC Cincinnati a very surprising 4-1 win. Like, I don't think anybody saw this one coming, especially the way that both of these teams, and how Orlando City was like the top team of the Eastern Conference, and yet they suffer a very surprising 4-1 loss at home, nevertheless. And you just hope that if you're an Orlando City fans, that this is probably just a fluke, and that this was just kind of one of those games where their team just didn't show up, and that maybe things are going to be better, and that they better hope that that is the case. Because if that is not the case, and if this is just a beginning of what we've seen before, where this is right about the time when Orlando City started to go on a bit of a collapse after they got off to a great start to the season, yeah, Orlando City fans hope that that is not the case. But as for FC Cincinnati, you know, if only they can play like this every single game and not just play like this against the top team, they would have been one of the better team in the Eastern Conference. But it's a shame that they only kind of show up whenever they play against top team, which I guess maybe FC Cincinnati fans would be happy the fact that they should just for now on play against some of the best team in the league, and that maybe that will be a way to get them over the red line and make it to the playoffs for the first time in their franchise history. But that being said, I am now going to be switching the boards and look at the last 7 games that happened from this week. But yeah, next up, Minnesota. So the Loons picked up another 3 points against FC Dallas as they won 2-1 against them. And I think earlier I said that Minnesota might have actually got another 1-0 result during their weekend matchup. Well, it turns out that was not the case, and that they actually, for once, actually scored more than a goal in a game, and that they won 2-1 against Dallas. And this was relatively a comfortable win for Minnesota. Kevin Molino scoring for the second time this week in the 38th minute. Then Luis Almeida scoring the ninth minute to make it 2-0, and you knew at that point it was pretty much over. Dallas did try to make it interesting, but by scoring in the 72nd minute, and this was actually a lovely goal from Paxton Palmico to basically strike this one for about 33 yards out, but unfortunately that is as close as Dallas is going to get to Minnesota, as the Loons once again picking up all 3 points and extending their lead in the top of the table in the Western Conference, which I of course will talk about once I finish reviewing these last 7 games and change the boards again. But moving on, in terms of the next match is SKC. So Sporting KC has finally ended that winless run that they had ever since it started after winning their first 2 games of the season, and they would end that winless run by beating the Rapids at home 2-1. Johnny Russell scoring the first goal just 13 minutes into the game to give SKC a 1-0 lead. Kai Kamara did tie the game up 3 minutes coming out of intermission, and you know that this one is going to be from a header, because it seemed like every single goal that Kai Kamara scored is from a header, and you know who the person that assists that header is most likely going to be from Jack Price, and you guessed it right, because this was just a beautiful delivery into the box from a corner from Jack Price, which Kai Kamara once again rised up to everybody else and score another goal. And that, you know, at this point, if Kai Kamara continued to score that many goals, I'm a little bit concerned about Wando's all-time goal scoring record in MLS, and that, you know, it could actually be passed by Kamara. And that, I know I read an article on MLSsoccer.com talk about how whether or not if Kai Kamara could potentially reach Wando, and it is a possibility, because, you know, the rate that he is still scoring, and as long as if he can stay healthy and still score 10+ goal every single season, he can actually catch Wando in 2.5 seasons. But obviously that depends on if Wando is going to score more goals in his final season, or at least we think this is his final season, because he's been saying that he's thinking of maybe playing another season because of this whole pandemic and the league kind of being shut down like this. But yeah, it's possible that Kamara could actually catch Wando, and that if that does happen, it's going to be interesting to see how the league is going to react, and how whatever his team he is going to be going to react, because unlike Wando, where he's been with the same team throughout his entire career, and I say the same team even though I know Houston Dynamo fans are going to be triggered and say that he was with the Dynamo, but guess what, I will kind of just throw back that triggering and saying that that was actually the team of the Quakes, and I still refuse to believe that even though that team was moved from the Quakes, or from that team was moved from San Jose to Houston, and that it's a completely different team. They basically had the same player that we had, and that those 2 MLS Cup clearly should have been ours. But without kind of going deeper into that rabbit hole, going back to what I said about Kai Kamara, you know, since he's been with a lot of different teams, it's kind of interesting to see how each of these teams going to celebrate and congratulate Kai Kamara for his achievement. I don't know. I mean it's going to be interesting to see how that is. But going back to this game, despite the fact that he tied the game up for the Rapids at that point, Kyrie Shelton would get the winner for SKC, and it came in the 75th minute as Sporting KC finally end that winless run they have, and hopefully with them ending that miserable run that they have for the past month, this will be start to climb up the table, because yeah, this was a team that in the beginning of the season we talked about how, well, looks like Sporting KC is back, and now they are not back after these next couple of games, but they could be back if they can potentially start a bit of a winning run after they end this winless drought. And for the Rapids, you know, they're just going to have to move on in the next match, because, you know, this is a team that is not known to win on the road, and it's have shown in the past couple of road games where they have dropped a couple of road performance during this season. But yeah, moving on, in terms of the next match, it's probably the least surprising match of this week. So as much as we had some big upset that has happened this week, where some of these teams in the top of the table lost to some of these teams that were near the bottom of the table. This was not the case for the Seattle Sounders, as they took care of business against the Whitecaps in probably the most predictable fashion you would think the Sounders are going to do, which is just completely dominating Vancouver. Like, the Whitecaps had zero chance coming into this game, and the way how this game played, it looked like they pretty much have even lower than 0% chances of winning this one. Raul Ruidiaz would score in the 20th minute to give the Sounders a 1-0 lead. They would double that lead in the 56th minute from Jordan Morris. And Harry Shipp even scored a rare goal to pretty much put the icing on the cake as the Sounders. I mean, this is as easy of a victory as they're going to get throughout the season, as the Whitecaps just clearly didn't show up. And it's understandable because they are the worst team in the... Well, they are one of the worst team in the league, and that this is going to be something that they're going to have to deal with throughout the season. But moving on, in terms of the next match, is probably the most anticipated match of this weekend. I mean, I know we had some marquee matchup heading into this weekend, but this one was probably the most anticipated because both of these teams were unbeaten and both of these teams were near the top part of the Western Conference. And in the end, both of these teams remain unbeaten as LAFC was able to snatch a 2-2 draw against RSL. Mark-Anthony Kaye got the scoring going in the 14th minute for LAFC. But then Krylak would score a brace in the 33rd and 44th to give RSL a 2-1 lead. And it looked like RSL was going to hand LAFC their first loss this season, and only the third time that LAFC have actually lost at home in the regular season. But it wasn't meant to be because Latif Blessing would rescue LAFC a draw in this game in the 84th minute. And overall, you know, it ends in an honors even 2-2 draw, and I guess, you know, both teams will be happy they got a point out of this game. I think RSL probably will be the more happier side, even though I know they blew a lead in this game. But anytime you get any point out of Bank of California Stadium, it is a big bonus because this is the toughest place to play and the toughest place to actually get a point out of it. And as for LAFC, yeah, you know, I understand that they're still unbeaten, and I understand the fact that they still have some games in hand where if they get those games in hand, then they, of course, will be back near the top of the Western Conference. But that's if they win those games in hand, because it's one thing to have games in hand and that you can potentially get back to the top of the Western Conference, but it's another that if you don't actually win those games in hand, you're basically going to be stuck in that same spot where you are right now, which is in I believe they're now in 4th place of the Western Conference, which is right in the middle of the pack in terms of the playoff spot. But yeah, moving on in terms of the next game is Columbus. So the Crew absolutely did some daylight robbery against Chicago in this game because the Fire absolutely dominated this game against the Crew, but yet Columbus was able to snatch all 3 points out of this game. And, you know, early on in the 16th minute when Alvaro Madron scored the first goal for Chicago, it looked like this was going to potentially be a rout because Chicago dominated all the chances and had all the opportunity. But Columbus did get the equalizer in the 28th minute, and this was just some self-inflicted wounds from the Fire because it was a bad back pass that Zardes basically stole away and able to go on one-on-one with the goalkeeper to tie the game up at 1 apiece. And just as it looked like, even though with that self-inflicted wound, Chicago looked like they were going to get that lead back. And as we head late into the game, you know, Chicago were by far the team that most likely is going to get that second goal. And Columbus was really holding on for just a point. But little did they know that Columbus would hit Chicago on the counterattack in the 89th minute, which Zyler Ryan would score to give them a 2-1 lead. And yeah, I mean, this, as I said before, feels like a daylight robbery that Columbus just committed because in many ways, they probably didn't deserve all 3 points in this game. But they got all 3 points in this game, and Chicago will be feeling very hard done because they were by far the better team in this game, and yet they come out of this game empty-handed and didn't get any points when they're playing at home. But yeah, moving on in terms of the next match is another surprising result, and this one is just as surprising as the FC Cincinnati versus Orlando City Resort, where the top of the table team against the bottom of the table team, and you have like a top of the table versus bottom of the table clash. It turns out the bottom of the table team was able to win this little clash, as NYCFC, coming into this game dead last in the Eastern Conference and haven't won a game in a very long time, was able to pull out an impressive 1-0 road win against the Union. The only goal came in the 75th minute when Alexandro Matrita, boy, how much he has struggled this season after he had an incredible first season in the league, finally broke his duck and scored his first goal of the season to give NYCFC the 1-0 lead, and that's all they need to get all 3 points against the Union, who, you know, I think the Union are still going to be at the top of the Eastern Conference out of this, but they'll be very disappointed. The fact that they literally just, like, their first, I think this is also their first loss this season, and their first loss of the season is going to be against a team that is dead last in the Eastern Conference. But hey, this is the week where there were definitely some crazy upsets happen, and that you would think the team at the top of the table, when they face against a bottom feeder, that they were going to get all 3 points, and it turns out that that was not the case, and they didn't even get anything out of that game. But that being said, moving on into the final game of this week, which was the rematch of the 2018 MLS Cup between Atlanta versus the Portland Timbers. And in this game, it was a 1-1 draw between both of them. The first goal came in the 12th minute from Ezekiel Barco, but Jimmy Chara did equalize for the Timbers, as the game, of course, were tied up at 1 apiece, and that is exactly how it finished. And, you know, for Portland, at least, they'll be happy the fact that they got some points, because there are also one of those teams that you thought that they should be decent this season, and the wheels have just really come off throughout this season, and that, you know, at least they maybe have find some rhythm in this game to start thinking about getting wins in the future. But as for Atlanta, they'll be very disappointed that they didn't get all 3 points, because you would think with a struggling Portland team, they would probably get all 3 points, and especially they've been very good at home. That was not the case in this game, and they dropped points against one of the team that is really struggling this season. But yeah, there you have it. That is pretty much it in terms of the games that I have reviewed, which is 15 games from MLS Matchweek Simulated, our MLS Simulated Matchweek number 8. But now, before I end this video, I'm going to switch the board one more time to look at where each team stands in the MLS Simulated table. Alright, so here is the standing after 8 weeks of simulated action in MLS. And we start with the Eastern Conference, and at first we have a new leader in the Eastern Conference in the Union, who, despite the fact that they did lose their weekend matchup, they're still at the top of the Eastern Conference with 16 points. Whereas Orlando City currently have 13 points right now. Atlanta currently have 11 points. Toronto FC with 10 points. DC United with 9 points. FC Cincinnati, who, after they got that impressive victory against Orlando City, have now yo-yo themselves back above the Eastern Conference playoff table with 8 points, although they're right behind by New England, who also have 8 points, and that there's a bit of a two-way tie between 6th place right now in the Eastern Conference standings. Then in 8th place, we got NYCFC, who I think this week they were by far the biggest mover in terms of the standings, as they jumped from dead last in the Eastern Conference to now being just outside of the Eastern Conference standing with 7 points. Columbus also have 7 points, tied in 9th place. Then we have a freeway tie that pretty much is the bottom of the Eastern Conference in the Chicago Fire, the Redbulls, and Montreal Impact, all with 6 points apiece. But certainly, most of these teams are still pretty bunched up to each other, and that if you have some of these teams that, you know, even though they're in the lower part of the table, if they can start to get hot and get some wins in a row, they could really shoot up in terms of getting themselves up near the top of the Eastern Conference because of how compact the Eastern Conference is. Now, in the Western Conference, however, in first place is Minnesota, who now have 22 points and actually extended their lead at the top of the Western Conference and even extended the lead of the Supporters' Shield standing to 6 points. Right behind them is the Seattle Sounders, although, as I mentioned before, the Sounders does have a couple of games in hand, so if they can win their games in hand, they could be right up there and pretty much with toe-to-toe with Minnesota. Then you got Real Salt Lake with 15 points. LAFC, who I also mentioned, they have a couple of games in hand, currently sits in 4th with 14 points. The Colorado Rapids with 13 points. Then we got a tie for 6th place between Dallas and the Galaxy with 10 points apiece. But then in 8th place, Sporting KC with 9 points to their name this season. And again, if this team can start to get on a bit of a run, they could definitely get themselves to the top part of the Western Conference table. Same with the Portland Timbers, who, you know, if they can get some kind of winning streak going, they can really challenge up in the Western Conference, currently in 9th place with 7 points. Then you got the Dynamo with 6 points, the Quakes with 5 points, and then at the very bottom, currently owns the wooden spoon spot, is the Vancouver Whitecaps with only 4 points to their name. But yeah, there you have it. That is pretty much it for another review of MLS Simulated Match Week. This time for match week number 8. Let me know in the comments below what do you think of this video, and talk about how your team did during this week's simulated matchup. I mean, as much as I know, I have kind of started to enjoy doing these simulated matchup review video and kind of come up with how each of these games took place. I do really miss the actual game that has happened, and as I said many times before, hopefully once this pandemic is over, MLS can get back into action and I can actually talk about actual games that took place, and that there's going to be actual games that counts toward the actual standings that is right now in MLS. But until then, hope you guys enjoy this video, and I will see you guys next time.